Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Let's see if you can guess what the topic of the video today is based on what you see on the screen behind me. No, I'm just kidding. Today we're going to be talking about QR codes and how to generate QR codes on your Wix website or Wix Studio website using embeddable HTML elements. We'll be talking about how to write up the code that will go into these elements, as well as some common use cases such as dynamically passing in a URL of a specific page to your QR code, or to generate multiple QR codes using data from a CMS collection, for example. So if you want to learn how to do all that and more, let's get started. So before we get started, let me just go over my setup. So as you can see, I currently am inside the Wix Studio editor, and I'll be using Wix Studio today, but everything that I'll be showing you can be done just as well inside of the classic Wix editor, and I'll be pointing out some key aspects of the implementation in that editor as well. In addition, I have this GitHub repository open, and this is some code written by this team. You can look it up if you want to learn more. It seems to be a more niche implementation of QR codes. Like, I did find some NPM packages that seemed a little more popular than this one, but the advantage of this one is that it was very easy to use, which I think is a big plus. There might be some downsides in terms of, I don't know, performance or flexibility or reliability. I'm not sure. I haven't used this package before. But from what I can see, it's pretty easy to use and it works. You can do what we're doing today with a package of your choice, and most of the steps will be the same, just the part where you design the actual code that's going to go into the iframe will be a little different based on the package that you use. In addition to the documentation here, this repository, I also have a link to a CDN so that we can actually implement this repository inside of our iframe without copying and pasting all the code. And I also have a pen open over here. And this is going to be used for, get rid of all these errors that I have here on the bottom. And this is what we're going to use in order to build out the code, which is going to go inside of our iframe or embeddable HTML in Wix, just because it's a little hard to write code inside of that element itself. So we'll be designing everything here inside of CodePen. This is a free online IDE, which is very simple to use and visual. And then once we know that everything's working, we'll just go ahead and head back to Wix and complete the implementation there. So we're going to start out here inside of CodePen, and the first thing I'm going to want to do is make sure that we have this package working and we have all the basics in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this code from the CDN. I'm just going to go ahead, and you could either copy the URL or copy the script tag. I'll copy the entire script tag, and I'm going to head back over to my pen, and I'm just going to paste this right on top. To be honest, you probably don't need a lot of the stuff here, and it would probably work if we just had the source itself. But I'm going to leave it in because a few lines of code is not going to hurt anyone. So that's what we have here, and this is essentially importing all of the code that was written by the nice people who built out this repository into our code. Okay, so we don't have to actually create a QR generator from scratch. We can actually use somebody else's implementation. And the next thing we're going to want to do is to implement this code right over here, which will actually generate the QR code. And I do want us to understand this somewhat because we are going to want to have some grasp of what's happening, because this is our code, and if we want to make changes or manipulate it slightly, it's important for us to understand what's going on. So the first thing that we have here is we have a div, which has an ID of QR code. So I'm going to go ahead and add that here into our pen. Just going to create a div, and I'm going to close the div, and we'll give this an ID of QR code. And essentially, this is going to be an element, an HTML element, which we are going to attach the QR code to once it's generated. Okay, so that's our div right over here. And the next thing that's happening here is we have a script. Okay, so we have some JavaScript. And inside of that script, we're declaring a new variable, which is called QR code, which is a new QR code uh, object or class. And we're essentially getting that QR code element. I might choose to do it a little differently and actually grab this beforehand and pass a variable in here because it looks a little messy. And here we have also the option to pass in options. So different information. So what's critical here is going to be the text. And a QR code can store any kind of information. It doesn't necessarily need to be a URL. But the most common use case is a URL, and that's probably what we're going to be passing in here as the text. In addition, we can customly define width and height. Color dark, I'm assuming that's kind of what would typically be the black part in like a very standard QR code. And color light would be what would be white, and that's currently what we have here. And correct level, without getting too deeply into QR code philosophy, because I actually don't understand it that much. It has to do with, I think, if I'm not mistaken, how much data can go into the QR code versus how easy it will be for people to read the QR code if there are some inaccuracies in the printing or something like that. If this is something that's important to you, I would recommend reading on it a bit more. I think it's slightly beyond the basic level of this tutorial. And you can see here that we also have the option of just passing in a URL. Okay, so if you are okay with just the basics, so having standard, I'm not sure what the standard height width is, we could see that in a moment. But if you're okay with just like black and white, whatever height and width it gives with the default, you can actually just do this more simple implementation. So let's start off with the simple implementation and see what that looks like. And then I'll show you how it would look with the options as well. So we're going to need to add a script to our CodePen here. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a script. And I'm going to add in the script closing tag as well. And here, so the first thing we're going to want to do is select this div element. And he did it, or the people, I don't know if it's a he, a she, a they, but whoever created this package selected it kind of within the method. I don't like that so much. So what I'm going to do is say const QR code wrapper equals to, and here I'm going to say document dot get element by ID, and it will pass in QR code. Okay, so this now should be our QR code element that we have over here. And now we can actually generate the QR code. So I'll say here const QR code, excuse me, equals to, and if we head back here to the instructions, so we need to declare new QR code, and we're going to pass in that element, and we're going to pass in the URL. So let's go back here to the pen. So we'll say here new QR code, and we're going to pass in QR code. Let me zoom in here, QR code wrapper. And we're also going to pass in the URL, which I'll declare here as well. So I'll say here const QR code URL, and that's going to be equal to, for now, I'll send in the wixwiz.com. Whoops. Is it? I just forgot if it's 2 dashes or it's, yeah, first this and then 2 dashes. A little bit of a brain fart there. www.thewixwiz.com. Awesome. So that's our QR code URL, and I'm going to pass that in right over here. So QR code URL. And now that should be enough to generate our QR code, which is right over here. And you see if I like hover over it, it already has the tooltip, which is www.thewixwiz.com. And if I grab my cell phone to scan it, and yeah, so I see here, it says thewixwiz.com, and I click, and boom. Okay, we're at the Wixwiz website. Okay, so that is working. So if this is good enough for you, this very basic implementation, then you're good to go pretty much. If you want something with some options, let's see what that would look like. Okay, so in order to add some options in here, what I'll do is also, as I've been doing, I will create the options outside of this declaration here. Okay, so I'll say const options equals to, and then we have an object. And this object has a few properties. So one is text, which is going to be our QR code URL. Okay, and the other things that we had was height, we had width here, and I'm just going to copy it because it'll prevent me from making mistakes. So let me just grab everything that we have over here, and I'm going to paste it right over here. Okay, text we don't need twice, so I'm going to get rid of this one. And you might be able to see here on the side that it's already kind of generating a QR code, and it looks pretty much the same as last time. But let's say I was to change, I don't know, the color property over here. So let's say 22. And I don't know if that's a real color actually. But I don't know, let's say like, I don't know, is like EF, EF, EF a color? These might not be actual colors. Oh, okay. I know why it's not changing and why it looks exactly the same as before. Because I didn't pass the options in over here. Okay, I'm still generating it using the QR code URL, and I'm not using the actual options. Let me go back to the default that we had here. And here, instead of QR code URL, I'm going to pass in our options. Okay, and now it changed. So here you can see now that it's a bit smaller. And if I change, let's say, the height and width, so I make it, let's say, 150 by 150, so I can change the size of it. And if I go ahead and I change the coloring, let's say change this to like 111, still not changing the coloring. Let's see, EF, 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 I think that's a color. Yeah, so that's like a really light color that's not such a good idea. But basically, if you wanted like another dark color, like a blue, or I really wish I knew color codes a little bit more by heart, but I don't. So that's kind of the control that we have in over here. And again, I said I'm not going to play around here with the correct level. It's probably not very hard to adjust, but since it's something that I don't understand, I'd rather not play around with it. And I have a feeling that it might work even if we don't even pass that in. Let's just check. Yeah, so if you don't pass that in, it'll just default to whatever the default is. It's probably true regarding the rest of the options as well. So now that we understood how to generate a QR code with a URL of our choice and how to adjust the different options if we want to, let's talk a bit about how we can pass a dynamic value here into the iframe, because we're not going to want to hard code every single iframe that we put in. So if you're only using one of these on your website, you just want to put one place with a QR code, then you probably would just generate a picture and put it there. So I'm going to assume that you're looking for something a little more dynamic, where you can pass the URL into the iframe dynamically and then generate the QR code. So now we're going to set up the code here in order to facilitate that kind of implementation. Okay, so in order to send the URL that we want to generate the QR code for into our iframe or future iframe, we're going to need to use something called post message. And right here you can see that I'm inside of the Velo reference, the Velo documentation, and specifically the documentation for HTML component, aka iframe, aka embed HTML element, etc. So this is a component in Wix that we're going to be using. And it allows us to essentially paste code like we just built inside of CodePen inside of our Wix page. I have some other videos explaining about this component in general if you want to get a little more background, but I'll try and do some explaining here as well. So we're going to be using this post message, which is used essentially for sending a message from the Velo code on your site page to the iframe. And the part that we're going to be implementing now is how the iframe itself receives that message and does something with that message. So we're going to be utilizing this event here. So window.onMessage right over here. So I'm actually just going to copy this code as is. and I'm going to head back into our CodePen. And what I'll do over here is I will paste this code right over here. So window on message. And let me just reformat that. So basically, this is what's going to happen after our window gets a message. And we'll talk about how to send that message later on. But once we get that message, we're going to want to do something. And this message will contain some data, specifically the URL that we want to generate the QR code for. So we're going to say here, if event.data, and not only if event.data, specifically, I'm going to say if event.data.url. Okay? And I'm just going to put these question marks here so that if for some reason one of those things is missing, it won't throw an error. So if we have this URL property on data, then here, okay, I'll say console.log URL. Okay, and this is just for testing purposes. We can get rid of that later on. And here we're going to implement code, which will generate the QR code, which is essentially this. So I could just take all this and plop it inside, but it's a little messy. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create a function. So I'm going to say function generate QR code. And this will be that function. So everything that we've done before will fit into that generate QR code function. Okay, right over here. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to format this because it looks ugly. Still looks kind of ugly. And we're going to want to change this QR code URL that we have over here to the dynamic URL that we get from the message that we posted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this QR code URL. And instead, I'm going to pass URL here as a parameter argument. I always get confused what's what inside of our function. And I'm going to put it here as well. Whoops. And then over here, once we get the message from our iframe, from our Velo page code inside the iframe, what we're going to do is we're going to call that function. So generate, let's just copy it because I will probably make a typo if I don't. Generate QR code, and we'll pass in event.data.url. So the URL essentially that we got from the Velo code. Okay? And this is going to be a little hard to test here inside of CodePen. So now we are actually ready to grab all this code, head over to our Wix site, and start seeing it working over there. So here I am back inside of Wix Studio, and I'm going to add in the iframe/HTML element that we're going to be using to embed the code that we just created. So I'm going to go over here to add elements, and I'm going to look for embed and social, and specifically over here, embed code. Okay, I'm just going to plop that right in there. And I'm going to show you now how to do that same thing inside of the Wix editor. And it's almost identical. It's just you have to look in a slightly different place. So here it's add elements. And then here we have embed code. And here it's embed HTML element. Okay, and then from this point, it's pretty much the same. So I'm going to go and head back into Wix Studio. And here, inside, now you see that our iframe is very sad because it doesn't have any code inside. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter code. And here, I'm going to paste the code that I just copied from CodePen. So just Control-C, Control-V. And don't forget to click this update button right over here. Otherwise, it won't save. And now you can see possibly why I chose to do this in CodePen, because it's like a little hard to edit the code here. It does look a little better than what I remember, but it's still not so fun. Okay, and at the moment you can't see anything in here, and that's because we haven't yet told this iframe what URL we want to use for our QR code. So in order to do that, we're going to need to turn on code mode or dev mode inside of Wix Studio. And that's right over here. So code, start coding. This is also slightly different in Wix Classic, so I'll show you that as well. That would be up here. You see dev mode, and then turn on dev mode. Okay, after that, it's pretty similar. And you can see here the code panel opens up here on the bottom, same in both editors, and that's where we're going to be playing here. So here I'm in the code panel for the home page. And what we're going to want to do is implement this post message, but the part specifically that goes on the Velo code side. So here we're going to post a message, okay, just like this. So we're going to select the HTML element and we're going to post a message. Our message is going to be an object, okay, not just text like this. So let's go ahead back to Wix Studio. And what I'm going to do, first I'm going to select our iframe here, and I'm going to rename it. So let's call this QR code. Let's just call it QR code. QR code. That's a good name. And then I'm going to go here into our page code. And inside of the onReady function, I'm going to select the QR code element, just like this. Yeah, and it's showing a red squiggly line now because you have to click in here to update. There we go. And I'm going to say dot post message. And here we're going to post a message, so it's going to be URL and whatever URL we want to pass in. So let's say, again, I want to pass in thewixwiz.com. So I'll do HTTPS. And now I remember how to write a URL. So www.thewixwiz.com. And now, if we format that, and we take a look at this in preview mode, hopefully we will be able to see a QR code. And if we don't, then we get to go into a debugging session. So I don't see the QR code showing up, which means that we're going to start debugging and seeing what I did wrong and how to fix it. And hopefully it'll be very informative when you also hit a snag and you need to figure stuff out. I went ahead and I published my site just because sometimes, especially when you're dealing with iframes and embedded elements, there are some errors that are just a lot harder to see in the console when you're in preview mode as opposed to your live site. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to open up the console over here. And we can see that we have an error. I have an error. And it says here, unquote reference error, URL is not defined. And if I go over here into the code pen, then we can see here that I said console.log URL. But actually what I meant to say is console.log event.data.url, because URL doesn't exist here. Only event.data.url doesn't exist. And since it was throwing that error over here before we actually generate the QR code, it didn't work. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to put that here instead of URL. And then I'm going to grab all of this code, and I'm going to head back to our site, back into the editor, and I'm going to say here, edit code. I'm going to just select everything and paste in the new code here. Okay, so here I've replaced it with the correct code, and I'm going to not forget to click update. And now I'm going to try and go into preview mode again. So let's see if we have any luck this time. And boom. Okay, so now we have the QR code that's generated. And this is generated dynamically. So it's generated using a URL that I passed in from my Velo code. So that means that I can write Velo code to get any URL that I want, pass it into this iframe, and then display a QR code dynamically. So I'm going to now show a few examples of what I think use cases would be. I'm happy to hear if you have more use cases and questions in the comments below. I can try and answer them and guide you to how they would be done. But I just thought of a few common use cases, so I'm going to demonstrate those now. So one common use case I think you might have is to display a QR code for the current page on your Wix website. Okay, so how would we do that? It's actually quite simple, and we have most of the code in place already. We just need to get the URL of the current page and pass it into the iframe. So in order to do that, we're going to import a package called Wix location frontend. And then what we can do here is say const URL equals to Wix location frontend dot URL. Okay? If you want to get fancy, you can even extract it like this. So you can say const URL. And then here, instead of passing in the wixwiz.com, we're going to want to pass in URL. And again, if you want to get fancy, you can actually just pass it in like that. Okay, because if you pass in, do I even want to try and explain this? If you pass in just the property, then it will assume that the value is a variable with the same name that was declared earlier. Pretty good explanation, I think. So essentially, this is the same as URL colon URL. And now, if we go ahead into preview mode, then you can see here we have a QR code, and it has a really long, it looks very complicated, and you can see here that it's actually showing me now the URL of the editor. So that's another problem with preview mode, that the location of the URL is not really the URL of your website. But if we go here and I hit publish, whoops, publish here, and then load up the live site, then hopefully it will show me, yeah, so ethanwaxman.wixstudio.io/QR code. So this is currently the URL of this current page. And if I was to take the iframe, okay, if I was to take this iframe and this code and paste it on any page of my website, it would always show me the QR code of that specific page. We could probably even take it a step further by pinning this QR code and putting this code, let's say, on the master page. So let me try and do that. I might fail, but let's go ahead and try and see if I can figure that out. So for this, we're actually also going to see a slight difference between Wix Studio and Wix Classic, because if I'm not mistaken, Wix Studio doesn't have the pin element feature where you can have a single element that displays on all pages. But rather you have to use what's called global sections. And specifically what we already have here as a global section is the header or the footer. So here inside of Wix Studio, what I'll do is I'll actually implement this, let's say, in the header. So we'll have always in the header a QR code of that specific page. Pretty cool feature. So let's go ahead and make this a little smaller. And I'm going to go ahead and put that inside of our header right up here. And now that this is on our header, we're going to have to change this up a bit because this code is only going to run on our home page. So it'll run, this will work on the home page, but if we have other pages to the website, then it won't really work. So what we'll want to do is I'll just grab all this code and I will comment it out on the home page. And I'm going to go to something called the master page. So if I go over here to code, you can see here inside of the page code, I have master page over here. And what I'll do is I'll just paste the code. So Control A, Control V. So the same code that we had before, I'm going to paste here on the master page. And this is code that's going to run on every page of our website. And now what I'll do is I'll add another few pages to the site. So let me add a page, new page, and whoops. And I'll add another page, new page 2. Awesome. And I'll go ahead and I will also add, do I have a menu here already? I have a menu. Let's add our new pages to the menu. Let's add the pages, apply. Awesome. So now we can navigate easily between our pages of our site, and I'll move this so that it doesn't block our beautiful QR code, and I will publish the site. So now that it's published, I'm going to refresh. And okay, so the QR code, it's not looking so beautiful. And this is something that you can adjust using the options of the QR code. So I can make the QR code a bit smaller, and I could probably do it pretty quickly here if we want to. Let's say, so instead of 150 pixels, I'll just change it here to 50 pixels each, update the code, and publish that again. Let's give that a refresh. Yeah, so it's already looking a little better here. And now, so let me go over here, and you can see that this, luckily there's that tooltip, otherwise this would be very hard to demonstrate to you guys. But this is now showing a QR code for the home page. And if I go, let's say, to new page, and I hover over that, so you can see that it's changed to /blank, which is the default slug. I know I'm very bad for not changing the slug, but that's essentially the URL of this current page. And if I go to new page 2, then you can see that it's blank 1, and that's because it's for the new page 2. So that's kind of another demonstration of how this can be utilized. And you can do this, what I showed before, also for dynamic pages, and it would work the same way as the first implementation, because dynamic pages, if you just put it on a dynamic page and you pass in the URL of the current page, it will still be the current page, which is the dynamic page. So that is 1 or 2/3 basic advanced implementations or common use cases that I think people might want for their QR codes. And I'm going to try one more, which is going to be a little more complex. And I might give up in the middle. No, I might decide that it's taking too long in the middle. But if we manage to do it quickly, we'll get one more implementation. And that's an implementation for if I want to display multiple QR codes for a few different pages inside of the same iframe. So for example, I want to allow navigation to multiple pages on my website. So let's check that out now. Okay, so the first step, what I did is I generated this cartoons collection inside of the CMS. If you have no idea what CMS is, dynamic pages, data queries, etc., I do recommend checking out some of the other videos. I have videos about all those topics which you can learn more about, so I'm assuming some basic knowledge here. But I have a CMS collection here that I generated with the AI feature. So I just told it to like make some cartoons and the years and the ratings. So we can see here like Tom and Jerry, The Simpsons, and these random pictures of cartoons, which have nothing to do with the actual cartoons. But really the point is just to create some dynamic pages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a dynamic page for this collection. And I'm going to add an item page, and I'm just going to go ahead and add to site. And the reason I'm doing this is because I actually want this collection to generate a few different URLs here. So you can see here, now we have these dynamic URLs which were generated for the collection. And this is what I really want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, on the homepage of my website, I'm going to set up a data query to get all of the URLs from that collection. Before I do that, we're going to need to make some adjustments to our CodePen in order to allow it to generate multiple QR codes from multiple URLs at once. Okay, so here I am back inside of the CodePen, and we're going to need to change this up a little bit and make it a little more dynamic in terms of adding multiple QR codes. So what I'm going to do is this QR code here, I'm going to change this to be QR codes wrapper. Okay, and I'm going to select that element up here at the top of my script. So const QR codes wrapper equals to document.getElement by ID. And here we're going to have QR codes wrapper. And what I'm going to do inside of our generate QR code function, instead of using an element that we already have, I'm actually going to create a new element. So I'm going to say here QR code element equals to document dot create element, and it's going to be an element of type div. Just like we had before, we had a div. And then I'm going to pass this QR code element over here when we create our new QR code. And I'm going to append that new element to our wrapper. So I'm going to say here QR code wrapper. Let me scroll down a bit so you can actually see what I'm writing. QR code wrapper dot append, and we're going to append the QR code. QR code element. So let me go ahead and test and see if this is even working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this generate QR code function manually over here. So let's say generate QR code. And let me pass in a URL. So let's do HTTPS www.thewixwiz.com and add that in there. And it says QR code wrapper is not defined. So let me see why that says that. It's QR codes wrapper with an S. Makes sense because there are going to be multiple QR codes. So QR codes wrapper. Cannot read properties of null, reading append. And here also, 90% of bugs are typos. There we go. So that's working now. So we have our QR code. Okay, we only have one QR code that's being generated. But let's say I was to create multiple QR codes. So let's say I go like this. Then I should see, yeah, so now we can see that we have a few QR codes in a row. Okay, and we're going to want to work a bit on styling because it looks not so great. And here's a place where you're really going to have to take some liberty because you're going to have to style it inside the iframe however you want it to be styled on your site. And I can't really know exactly what you're going to want, but I'm going to assume you'll want them to be in some kind of grid with some nice spacing. Let's assume that for now. So I'm going to add a styles. I always forget if it's styles or style. I guess we'll find out in a moment. Maybe style. Yeah. It's style without an S. And what we're going to do here is, so I'm going to select this div, and I'm going to give it some styling. So let's do display flex. Awesome. So that's already looking a little better. And let's do flex. I think it's flex wrap. There's like no autocomplete here, so I'm like completely in the dark. Let's do wrap. I'll do height equals inherit and width inherit. Or should I do 100%? Let me do 100%. Basically, I want the height and the width of this to be the same as the parent. I don't see it's really doing much at the moment, but yeah. Okay, we'll figure it out as we go. So we got flex. Let's put in a gap. Let's put in a gap. Let's say 10 pixels. Okay. Let's do more. Let's do 20 pixels. 15 pixels. Okay, so this is what it looks like now. I'm really not going to go into it anymore because this isn't the core, and like you could play around with styling forever. But the idea is that we have several QR codes and they're discernible from one another. They're not overlapping. You might decide you want to add some kind of like text under them or something like that. The sky is the limit when you're doing embed elements, but I'm going to use this because this is the basics of what we want. So we altered our function so that it's a little more flexible. We've added in some styling for this wrapper element. And now what we need to do is we just need to change the reception of the message to generate, to be able to receive multiple URLs and generate multiple QR codes for those URLs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to change this to URLs. And here I'll change this to URLs as well. And instead of calling this function once, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a loop. So I'm going to say event.data.urls.forEach. And this essentially runs through each one of the URLs. This is going to be an array now, an array of URLs. And for each URL, we're going to run the generate function. So let me just grab this, generate QR code, URL. And this time it should really be single URL because that's how I defined it over here. So I think this should be good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these because we don't really need that anymore. And I'm going to grab all this code and head over to the Wix website to complete the implementation over there. Okay, so here I am back on my Wix website. Accidentally refreshed the editor for some weird reason. And I'm on the home page. And we're going to do the same thing we did before, so good practice. We're going to add an element, and it's going to be embed in social and embed code. And we're going to have that over there. We're going to enter the code, and I'm going to paste the newly written code that we have, so with all of the adjustments that we made. And I'm going to go ahead and click update, and that will get rid of the sad face that we have here. Okay, so now we have this, and I'm going to make it big because we know we're going to be getting a few QR codes here. I'm not sure exactly how the styling is going to pan out. So let's do that here. And I'm going to go ahead again and change the name of this to QR codes. And now what we need to do is we need to write some code on the page that will get all of those URLs essentially. So what we're going to do, I'm going to uncomment all of this. And I'm going to make some changes here. So instead of what we have here, we're going to still be getting something from Wix location, but it's not what we got before. I'm going to create a separate function here outside of the onReady because this is going to be a little longer. And it's going to be an asynchronous function. And we're going to be querying the collection, the cartoons collection for all the URLs. So I'm going to say get, let's call it get cartoon URLs. And we're going to be using the Wix data package, import Wix data. And what we're going to do over here is say const cartoons query results equals to await wixdata.query. And here we're going to need the name of the collection. So let me just verify that I'm using the right thing here. Cartoons. Oops. Close that. Cartoons.find. And now we're going to want to get the actual cartoon item. So I'll say const cartoons equals to cartoons query result dot items. And specifically from these items, what I want to get is the URL. So let's see what that field is called. So I'm going to go back here to databases, and I see here that it's not visible here, so I'm actually going to have to open up the collection and get that field name. So let's go over here, And here, this is the field that I'm trying to get, essentially. And I want to edit. And this is what I want, the field ID. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to go back over here. And I'm going to, I only want the URLs, right? So I'm going to say const URLs equals to cartoons dot map. And for each cartoon, I'm going to want the cartoon dot, theoretically I would want dot that, but since we can't do dot here because we have those dashes inside of the field name, we could just switch this out for something like this. Whoops. Okay. So that's essentially the slug, but it's missing our domain. Okay, if you noticed inside of the collection, these are only the slugs because when you're working within Wix, it knows that if you just give a slug, then it's navigating within your website. But since we're generating QR codes, which are going to be used by the general public, we want to include the entire URL, which includes the domain and the slug. So we're going to need to add that here as well. And that's where our Wix location is going to come in handy. So here it's going to be Wix location frontend dot, and I think that this is base URL, I think, and it's going to be plus the slug. Okay, so base URL plus slug. So we got our URLs, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to return, you can't see what I'm doing, return URLs. Awesome. So now what I'll do here is I'll turn my onReady into an async function. And instead of getting my URL like this, I'm going to say const URLs equals to await get cartoon URLs. And then here, instead of passing in URL, I'm going to pass in URLs. And that should be an array of all the URLs. And in order to confirm that, I'll add in a log here, so console.log URLs and URLs. Awesome. So I think we're ready to test and see if all the hard work that we put in pays off. So I'm going to go here into preview mode. And I don't see anything yet. So let's take a look here at the developer tool. So here I have URLs. And okay, so again, like what was happening before, so these are actually the URLs of the Wix editor because we're in the editor at the moment. That still should have generated the QR codes based on the logic that I set up. So let me go into, whoops. Let me go and publish this because I want to see what logs we have inside of the live site. So let me go ahead and inspect here. Okay, so this is from the one up here. So wait, did I maybe misname something? Let me just double check. So here the name of this is, naming typos, yay. So here I named this QR codes with an S. And here I'm still posting the message to the previous one that we developed for that's currently in our header. So I'm going to change this to say QR codes. And I'm going to publish the site. I'm going to refresh here. And I still don't see the URLs there, which is slightly concerning. The QR code, sorry. Now things start to get really fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to on message. We do have the on message, and we do have a console log that's set up over here. Let's see. Posting the URLs here. We do have a log. Give me a moment to figure this out, and I will be right back. Okay, I am back super quick because I went into preview mode and it did work in preview mode. So I saw the QR codes here. And then I was like back here and I'm like publishing and publishing. I'm like, what is going on? And then I realized that I was on the wrong page. So I'm currently on page blank 1 from the previous demonstration, and this new implementation is on our home page, which is this page, which is working. Yeah, so that's this. And here you can see that each URL is different. So let me zoom in just so you can see. So this one is cartoons slash, and this one is cartoons Tom and Jerry. This one is cartoons The Simpsons. This one is cartoons Adventure Time. Oh, you can't see. Adventure Time, etc. Believe me, they're all different. So that's like a multiple QR code implementation. And I see that my wrap isn't working. There's a few things that aren't working here style-wise, and they could be fixed up quite easily. But again, I'm not going to dive into it because it's not the point of this tutorial. So just to wrap up what we did, we showed a few different implementations of how to generate QR codes on your Wix website, specifically in a very dynamic way, because I think that's the most common use case, both for single QR codes for like the current page, also implementation in the header, and then we did an example of how to do multiple QR codes from a collection. And for this tutorial, I'm going to be doing something a little different than I usually do. And that is that I will be making the code snippets from this tutorial available on my website. So please look out for a link in the description and maybe up there if I remember, or just hop over to the website. It'll probably be as a blog post. And I will just go over what we did and add the code snippets for these for the embedding part and for the Velo side. For the specific implementations that we did, you might have to touch it up for your specific use case, but I hope you'll find that helpful. And generally, if you found this video helpful, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below if you think of anything that you want to share with us or any questions that you have. And if you found this interesting and you want to continue seeing videos like this every week, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.